for the beginning of the class, we'll just finish. So page 20 in the appendix, we'll finish reading the allocution Magnificate Dominum of Pope Pius XII in 1954. So that's page 20 of the appendix. And we were at the bottom. So we saw a number of things. Well, basically the church works through the ministry of the pastors, and the legitimate pastors in the church are the Pope and the bishops, and they are the only authentic teachers. We saw that in the previous, previous allocution, and here it continues with jurisdiction. So we just left at the bottom of page 20, last paragraph, and first there are some noticeable attitudes and tendencies of mind which presume to check and set limits to the power of bishops, the Roman pontiff not excepted, as being strictly the shepherds of the flock entrusted to them. They fix their authority, office, and watchfulness within certain bounds, which concern strictly religious matters, the statement of the truths of the faith, the regulation of devotional practices, administration of the sacraments of the church, and the carrying out of liturgical ceremonies. So basically, you can do your piety, all right, but leave us alone. That's the idea. A lot of people were thinking that way. They wish to restrain the church from all undertakings and business which concern life as it is really conducted, the realities of life, as they say. In short, this way of thinking in the official statements of some lay Catholics, even those in high positions, is sometimes shown when they say, quote, "We are perfectly willing to see, to listen to, and to approach bishops and priests in their churches and regarding matters within their authority, but in places of official and public business where matters of this life are dealt with and decided, we have no wish to see them or to listen to what they say. For there it is we laymen, and not the clergy, no matter of what rank or qualification, who are the legitimate judges," end quote. So this is typical of what you would call a liberal Catholic in the time. So where they would make a distinction or separation which should not be there between their private life as they are Catholic. So when they go on Sunday, all right, they will listen to the priest, and this is very pious, he's preaching about Our Lady, and they pray the rosary or whatever. But then the Monday, the next day, they go back to the parliament or whatever, the house, and they are debating as if they were pagans, because religion should not enter the sphere of politics. So that's a problem. JFK was a liberal, for example. He was Catholic, but he was a complete liberal. He had this idea of, I am the president. As a president, I won't be Catholic. In the sense that he will basically, for example, the question of abortion, all of those questions, you cannot abstract them from religion, obviously. So you cannot say, I know from my catechism, but it's wrong. But when I'm in parliament, then I cannot use that anymore. It doesn't apply anymore, or that's completely wrong. So Pope Pius XII says, "We must take an open and firm stand against errors of this kind. The power of the Church is not bound by the limits of matters strictly religious, as they say, but the whole matter of the natural law, its foundation, its interpretation, its application, so far as their moral aspects extend, are within the Church's power. For the keeping of the natural law by God's appointment has reference to the road by which man has to approach its supernatural end. But on this road, the Church is man's guide and guardian in what concerns his supreme end. The apostles observed this in times past, and afterwards, from the earliest centuries, the Church has kept to this manner of acting and keeps to it today, not indeed like some private guide or advisor, but by virtue of the Lord's command and authority." So the Church would do that not only as giving advice, like, okay, on this question, divorce, for example, really, no, it's not, you shouldn't do that, it's not a good idea. No, the Church can actually do that with authority and condemn it, and has done that. Therefore, when it is a question of instructions and propositions which the properly constituted shepherds namely the Roman Pontiff for the whole church and the bishops for the faithful entrusted to him. Notice that again, it's just a parenthesis here, but the Roman Pontiff for the whole church and the bishops for the faithful entrusted to them. So there's no idea of collegiality here. He doesn't say, the bishops for the whole world, doesn't say that. Publish on matters within the natural law. The faithful must not invoke that saying, which is wont to be employed with respect to opinions of individuals, quote, the strength of the authority is no more than the strength of the arguments, end quote. So, okay, let the church say something about the natural law, and we will listen to it. We'll see if it makes sense, but we take it as an argument, that's all. Like, it would be the same as, if your friend says, no, I don't think it's correct because this and this and that. As opposed to, actually, the church has authority on those questions, so we can, we should actually follow her divine authority. So, liberal Catholics, again, maybe, they will be like, I'm a conservative, I will actually pay attention to what the church say, but not actually following it because of the authority of Christ, but rather because of the argumentations. You see what I mean? So that's wrong too. Hence, even though to someone certain declarations of a church may not seem proved by the arguments put forward, his obligation to obey still remains. So think about, obviously this is completely impossible to apply to Bergoglio if you consider him to be the Pope. That's a problem, obviously. That even if you don't see why he says it, it's like, you have to obey, I mean. God wants the plurality of religion, and what else? Amoris Laetitia, all of those things, impossible to apply that to him, so obviously there's a problem here too. This was the mind, and these are the words of St. Pius X in his encyclical letter Singulari Quadam. We have already quoted that one, it's a very good one. He says, whatever a Christian man may do, even in affairs of this world, he may not ignore the supernatural, nay, he must direct all to the highest good as to his last end, in accordance with the dictates of Christian wisdom. But all his actions, in so far as they are morally good or evil, that is, agree with or are in opposition to divine and natural law, are subject to the judgment and authority of the church. End quote. So politics has a lot to do with moral issues, obviously. So the church has a say in those things. And he immediately transfers this principle to the social sphere. The social question and the controversies underlying that question, he says, are not merely of an economic nature, and consequently such as can be settled while the church's authority is ignored, since, on the contrary, it is most certain that it, the social question, is primarily a moral and religious one, and on that account must be settled chiefly in accordance with the moral law and judgment based on religion, unquote. So that's why Pope Leo XIII, for example, had many encyclicals on social issues. Because whether or not we should have a second lane on the road here, Spring Lake Highway, should really have shouldn't we build a higher road, something like that? All right, that's really up to the state. But as soon as we touch social questions, moral questions, then it obviously is something that the church can speak about and should be listened to. Many and serious are the problems in the social field, whether they be merely social or socio-political. They pertain to the moral order, are of concern to conscience and the salvation of men. Thus, they cannot be declared outside the authority and care of the church. Indeed, there are problems outside the social field, not strictly religious, political problems, of concern either to individual nations or to all nations, which belong to the moral order, weigh on the conscience, and can, and very often do, hinder the attainment of man's last end. Such are the purpose and limits of temporal authority. So can the state, for example, force you to take something that you don't want to, things like that, questions like that? Can the state just forbid any kind of protest or manifestation or whatever, as we have seen, things like that? Can basically the state decide what is okay for you to think? No, I'm not saying that as a Freemason, obviously, but like that the church can actually, without even any reference to the natural law, because that's the way modern society works, is that it's the will of a majority. So then the will or the thought of a majority, whatever that will or thought comes from, that this becomes an obligation. It doesn't make any sense. The relations between the individual and society, the so-called totalitarian state, whatever be the principle, it is based on the complete laicization of the state. Obviously, the church has a say on that, and of public life. That's completely wrong. The complete laicization of the schools. This is outrageous here. War, its morality, liceity or non-liceity when waged as it is today. So is it moral, for example, to use chemical weapons? Is it moral to use atomic bombs, things like that? The church can't pronounce on those things. And whether a conscientious person may give or withhold his cooperation in it. So what is the soldier to do, for example? The moral relationships which bind and rule the various nations. So that book of Hegg and Dutertre was really good for that because obviously it speaks a lot about the moral issues, and you could see how the Pope was the mediator, like the father of all Christendom. So he would be the mediator in many cases between nations when they were fighting. So, but compare that to fake Pope Paul VI, who basically told the UN that you are to do this. You are the hope of the humanity, whatever. I mean, you are the one supposed to do that. So completely, he doesn't do his job, obviously. Common sense and truth as well are contradicted by whoever asserts that these and like problems are outside the field of morals, and hence are, or at least can be, beyond the influence of that authority established by God to see to a just order and to direct the consciences and actions of men along the path to their true and final destiny. This she is certainly to do not only in secret within the walls of a church and sacristy, but also in the open, crying from the rooftops, to use the Lord's words in Matthew, in the front line, in the midst of a struggle that rages between truth and error, virtue and vice, between the world and the kingdom of God, between the prince of this world and Christ its Savior. I think it's Chesterton who said, I want to speak only of politics and religion, everything else I don't care. Which is true actually for a lot of people. I mean, at least educated people usually will mainly speak about those things. But it's not wrong to once in a while speak about whatever, sports or something, but obviously at the end of the day it's only a recreation, it's only a distraction. The thing that really matters are politics and religion. We must add a few remarks on ecclesiastical discipline. Clergy and the laity must realize that the church is fitted and authorized, as also are the bishops, for the faithful entrusted to them in accordance with canon law, to promote ecclesiastical discipline and see to its observance. That is, to establish an external norm of action and conduct for matters which concern public order and which do not have their immediate origin in natural or divine law. Clerics and laity may not exempt themselves from this discipline. Rather, all should be concerned to obey it, so that by the loyal observance of the church's discipline, the action of a shepherd be easier and more efficacious, and the union between him and his flock stronger, that within the flock harmony and cooperation reign, and each be an example and support to his fellow. So you have the fast law, but also, different days. For example, Good Friday, everything should be closed. There shouldn't be a theater open on Good Friday, and the state should observe that. Yet, those points we have just mentioned in connection with the jurisdiction of bishops, who are shepherds of the soul committed to their care in all those matters which have to do with religion, moral law, and ecclesiastical discipline, are subjected to criticism, often not above a whisper, and do not receive the firm assent they deserve. So here he reiterates the fact that you need to give assent to what comes from the church. Hence, some proud modern spirits provoke serious and dangerous confusion, traces of which are more or less clear in various regions. The awareness, daily more strongly insisted on, of having reached maturity, produces in them an agitated and febrile spirit. Not a few moderns, men and women, think that the leadership and vigilance of the church is not to be suffered by one who is grown up. So the idea is it's good for little girls, but when you are an adult and you're strong, therefore you disobey. That's the idea. They not only say it, but they hold it as a firm conviction. They are unwilling to be like children and their guardians and stewards. They wish to be treated as adults who are in full possession of their rights and can decide for themselves what they must or must not do in any given situation. which means eat potato chips in a couch and not observing the fast. That's basically what it is. I mean, supposedly be adult, whatever. That means be a slave of one's passion. That's what it means. Let the church, they do not hesitate to say, propose her doctrine, pass her laws as norms of our actions. Still, when there is question of practical application to each individual lives, the church must not interfere. She should let each one of the faithful follow his own conscience and judgment. So Pope Pius XII was not in agreement with the Unitatis Humanae, I suppose. They declare this is all the more necessary because the Church and her ministers are unaware of certain sets of circumstances, either personal or extrinsic to individuals, so you need discernment. In them, each person has been placed and must take his own counsel and decide what he must do. So it's something that also Pope Pius XII spoke about, is the idea of situation ethics, which is exactly what Amoris Laetitia is about. Situation ethics, that is, it's moral. You have the moral law, but then, you have your own circumstances, so, adultery is wrong, but, you have the context, and that's exactly what the discernment is about. Bergoglio's discernment. So Pope Pius XII, in a number of his documents, actually spoke against that. Such people, moreover, are unwilling in their final personal decisions to have any intermediary or intercessor placed between themselves and God, no matter what his rank or title. 2 years ago, in our locution, so you have a number here, we spoke about these reprehensible theories, and we examined their arguments. Concerning the importance given to the attainment of a percent majority, this assertion is correct. It is just and right that adults should not be ruled as children, obviously. The apostle, speaking of himself, says, and here it comes, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I felt as a child, I thought as a child. Now that I have become a man, I have put away the things of a child. So we had that just this past Sunday. Where's Tobias? He's not there? He doesn't take his class, okay. That is not a true art of education which follows any other principle or procedure, nor is he a true shepherd of souls who pursues any other purpose than to elevate the faithful entrusted to his care, to perfect manhood to the mature measure of the fullness of Christ. But to be an adult and to have put off the things of childhood is one thing, and quite another to be an adult and not to be subject to the guidance and government of legitimate authority. Sorry. For government is not a kind of nursery for children, although socialist governments actually behave that way. So, you have to keep 6 feet and you have to wear the mask and you have this and this and this. Like, come on, I'm an adult, I can decide for myself. No. But the effective direction of adults towards the end proposed to the state. So it's very, it's ironic that, for the name of liberty, whatever, we arrive at a situation where we have a socialist state that will decide every single thing. It's like, oh no, you cannot have, even, I don't know how it is here, but in France, everything's so regulated. Like, you want to build a house, like the level of those things is also determined by law because, it can be dangerous, blah, blah, blah. So everything is baby-proof, basically. In all of your house that you want to build, everything is baby-proof everywhere. So we are treated like little kids, and that's for the sake of freedom. So. But since we are speaking to you, venerable brothers, and not to the faithful, when these ideas begin to appear and to take root in your flocks, remind the faithful, first, that God placed shepherds of souls in the church not to put a burden on the flock, but to help and protect it. So it's actually a good thing. Second, that the true liberty of the faithful is safeguarded by the guidance and vigilance of pastors, that they are protected from the slavery of vice and error. They are strengthened against the temptations which come from bad example and from the customs of evil men among whom they must live. Third, that therefore they act contrary to the prudence and charity which they owe themselves, if they spurn this protection of God and his most certain help. If among clergy and priests you find some infected with this false zeal and attitude, set before them the grave warnings which our predecessor, Benedict XV, uttered, quote, there is one thing which should not be passed over in silence. We want to warn all priests who are our daily beloved son, how absolutely necessary it is, not only for their own salvation, but for the fruitfulness of their sacred ministry, that each be most devoted and obedient to his own bishop. As we deplored in passing, not all dispensers of the sacred mysteries are free from that proud and arrogant spirit which is characteristic of our times. And it frequently happens that shepherds of a church are grieved and opposed where they might rightly expect comfort and help. And even though today, obviously, it has to be taken in its proper context, but uh, as a young priest, I mean, you will realize that it's actually a good thing to have superiors because you actually need that, and it avoids you a lot of mistakes. So this is true. Obviously, today it's not that, for example, Bishop Solomon, or if you work with another bishop, that they have jurisdiction. No, but yet for even naturally speaking, you actually need that. So, and it belongs to like it makes sense in the relationship of sacraments that even if there is no jurisdiction, that a young priest, for example, is not working on his own because he knows better. You don't know better, believe me. You will see that. Thus far, we have spoken of pastoral care about the persons for whose benefit it is exercised. It is not right to end our discourse without turning our attention to the pastors themselves. To us and to you, shepherds, the holy words of the eternal shepherd are pertinent. I am the good shepherd. I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly. To Peter, the Lord said, if you love me, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. To these good shepherds, he contrasts the hireling who seeks himself and his own interest and is not ready to give his life for his flock. He contrasts them with the scribes and Pharisees who, greedy for power and domination and seeking their own glory, were seated on the chair of Moses, amassing heavy and oppressive burdens and imposing them on the shoulders of men. Of his own yoke the Lord said, take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden light. Frequent and mutual communication among bishops is very helpful for the fruitful and effective exercise of the pastoral office. Thus, one perfects the other in assaying the lessons of past experience. Government is made more uniform. The wonder of the faithful is avoided, for often they do not understand why in one diocese a certain policy is followed, while in another, which is perhaps adjacent, a different or even a quite contrary policy is followed. Already, because I travel a little bit, so sometimes I know some people who say, why is it like this in France and why is it like that in the US, or because you have a few differences in the laws of fast, for example, things like that. But this is what it is. Yet it's pretty. I mean, it's quite uniform everywhere. But in any case, he was encouraging when bishops come together in a provincial council. So the bishop of a province would come together and basically have like a common catechism and have a common, common laws of fast and things like that. It's very good to have that, but it's not collegiality, okay? So that's important to understand, that one bishop is still obviously the pastor in his own diocese, but sometimes they come together to make sure they do the right thing, as we said, right? It helps them. It makes it uniform, so it's better for a lot of reasons, but still every bishop is the bishop of his diocese, so it's not collegiality. So he speaks about it here. To realize these purposes, general assemblies, which are now held almost everywhere, traveling is a lot easier now, obviously, are very helpful, and also the more solemnly convened provincial and plenary councils, for which the Code of Canon Law provides and which are governed by definite laws. In addition to this, so he's very much in favor of that, and that's a very good thing, but now, obviously, it has changed entirely. In the Novus Ordo, they take it as an exercise of collegiality with the Conference of Bishops, to the point where basically if the bishop decides something, the Conference of Bishops is pretty much governing a country instead of the bishop, or the bishop becomes like a delegate, as it were, of that Conference of Bishops, and that's not how it should work. In addition to this union and intercourse between brothers in the episcopacy, there should be added close union and frequent communication with this apostolic see, obviously. The custom of consulting the Holy See, not only in doctrinal matters, but also in affairs of government and discipline, has flourished from the earliest days of Christianity. Many proofs and examples are to be found in ancient historical records. When asked for their decisions, the Roman pontiffs did not answer as private theologians, but in virtue of their authority and conscious of the power which they received from Christ to rule over the whole flock and each of its parts. The same is deduced from the instances in which the Roman pontiffs, unasked, settled disputes that had arisen or commanded that doubts, dubia, be brought to them to be resolved. So if you check in the Acta, you will see many questions that were submitted to the Holy See. And sometimes the Pope is not going to answer that himself necessarily, but one of the congregations is going to take care of it. I guess Greg knows a lot about SRC. In a sense, you have a lot of SRC decrees from the Congregation of Rites. How to do this ceremony, how to do this and that, and when should we kneel, should we? Many times when there is a doubt, somebody will submit this doubt to the SRC, who will give then an answer, and then it becomes a law. And so the same thing applies for doctrine and different disciplines and whatever. So the bishops do that all the time, ask questions to the Holy See. This union, therefore, and our harmonious communication with the Holy See arises not from a kind of desire to centralize and unify everything, but by divine right and by reason of an essential element of the constitution of the Church of Christ. The result of this is not detrimental, but advantageous to the bishops to whom is entrusted the governing of individual flocks. So again, this is important, just because it's against collegiality. So the bishops to whom is entrusted the governing of individual flocks. So it's not collegiality again. From communication with the Apostolic See, they gain light and assurance in doubts, so they give the dubia, advice and strength in difficulties, assistance in labors, comfort and solace in distress. So the fact that Bergoglio did not answer the dubia directly, I mean, I'm sure you heard about when Amoris Laetitia came out, 4 cardinals, if I'm not mistaken, asked a dubia to the Holy Father, quote unquote, basically asking, do you actually mean this? Basically, I mean, that's pretty much what it was. And his answer, he did not answer the dubia directly, which is already is very telling, because a pope that would not settle so important questions, that means he doesn't want to do the pope. Like, he doesn't care about the church, obviously. And actually, he did answer dubia indirectly, and actually that's exactly what he meant. But in any case, it's in a normal situation, the Pope answers obviously with great solicitude, because those are very important things. On the other hand, from the reports of the bishops to the Apostolic See, the latter attains a wider knowledge of the state of the whole flock, learns more quickly and more accurately what dangers are threatening and what remedies can be applied to cure the evils. So, all right, so the rest of it is very pious, but you can read that on your own. Okay, what time? Okay, we have just time to do just a little bit, I suppose. So let's go to the notes, the class this time. So we're still speaking about you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and it's going to take a little longer still. Palmieri has a lot, and actually sometimes I'm skipping some of things because it takes forever, but he has a lot to say about that passage. But it's a very important one, though, and it does contain a lot of things. So anyway, we left number 30, or 30th. This is confirmed by the future promise edificabo. So the idea that when our Lord says tu es Petrus et super Petram edificabo ecclesia meam, that Petrus and Petram are one and the same. So the rock and Peter are the same. Remember that in many languages it's actually the same word, Kepha, or Petros, Petra in Greek. It's the same one. So this is confirmed by the future promise edificabo. For if Christ was speaking about himself, he would have said in the present tense, I built, since he was then already building his church upon himself. So why would he say that in the future? Thus, one thing is affirmed by Christ in the present, thou art Peter, while another is affirmed in the future, upon this rock I will build my church. Indeed, Simon is already named, and truly is Peter the rock, because he is already destined to be that on which the church will be built. In the same way as Abraham was called Abraham by God in Genesis, since he was to become the father of many nations, although he was not yet. So he was called the father of many nations. Obviously, this is going to happen only years and years later on, because he had only, it had to go through Isaac and Jacob, and then at last, Jacob had 12 sons, and then it really spread fast. But you see, he had to wait like 3 generations or what. And it's a good lesson. Many times, we can do something like in our apostolate. Keep that in mind. Like if you are in a situation, mission situation, or a parish or whatever, and you have struggle and it's not looking like it's working very well. Maybe for 20 years you will have very little progress, and then all of a sudden, boom, it happens. You see that with Abraham. So keep that in mind. So you have a school and it doesn't work very well, but you persevere, and then at last, perhaps, it will work. So. First corollary, Simon is the rock intrinsically. It is false to understand the text as if Simon were called Petron, which in English would be rocky, which is kind of funny, but in a sense, the rock as an adjective, but you get the idea. Like the Rocky Mountains, okay? Okay. Yes? I'm not familiar with that. The probably is better than I'm not. But I gave that translation because that's what it means, and you have the Rocky Mountains, right? So basically the idea is having the quality of rock. That's what it means. So imagine like the New American Bible or something like that. Like, yes, it has to be the same rock and Peter, so we shouldn't call him Saint Peter, we should call him Saint Rocky. Oh, completely gone. Anyway, by allusion to Christ, who would then be Petra, the rock, as if Simon would not participate of the property of being a rock, but would only be called so externally. So remember the analogy, like if you say you have healthy food, all right, in the analogy of attribution, the health is in the horse, but the food is healthy inasmuch as it procures the health of the horse. Do you recall that? Or maybe you haven't done logic, all of you. Did you? Who hasn't done logic? Okay, so anyway, there is something that's called the analogy of attribution. So if you have a healthy food, you say, oh, this food is really healthy. The food is dead. I mean, it's like it's a dead chicken. It's not really healthy in itself, intrinsically, but extrinsically it is healthy in as much as in relation to something outside of it. It causes health if it's chicken, let's say, in whoever is eating it, all right? So here, Rocky, if you want to call St. Peter Rocky, meaning he would be strong with regard to Christ because he would not cause the firmness of Christ. It would be the opposite law. Let's see. For the horse, the example we give in philosophy is the color. He has a healthy color. You know when somebody is sick because he's like really pale, so you see he's sick. But if he has a very, maybe he's like red face or something, he's like, oh, you're very healthy. So the color is healthy because it's caused by your health in the body. So you can say the same about Peter would be rocky just because he benefits from the firmness of Christ, but from the outside. Whereas it is actually, I mean, it does come from Christ, but inside. So even if the main rock is Christ, it does not follow that Simon would not participate intrinsically in the ratio and dignity of the rock communicated to him by Christ. And indeed, Christ says explicitly that Simon is truly a rock on which he will build his church. So he has that quality of being a rock himself. It's not just an external denomination. Like again, a color is healthy. The color doesn't have any health. It's like red is not healthy. Like it doesn't. You see, like it doesn't have health because it doesn't have life. If you just consider the color. So here's the same. Peter, actually in himself, has the quality of being a rock. Second corollary, it is in vain that some claim that this rock is not Peter, but Peter's profession of faith or Christ's divinity, which he has just professed. Indeed, as a rule, a demonstrative pronoun refers to the closest antecedent occurrence of a name. This rock, therefore, refers to the rock Peter just mentioned. And I guess we have to stop here just because we have the quiz, so sorry about that. But we'll resume that